So before we move on to setting the character up for IK, FK switching, we'll just go back to the file from before we started doing the baking. And it should be this one where you've got the walk cycle, then you've got the track, the channel with the two strips on it for the hands dangling down and the leaning as the character went over the bridge. Save this file as FK, IK switching, so we don't write over the previous one with the curve, and we're going to start making some changes. So let's get the character back to its rest pose basically. We're going to choose to delete the curve. We don't need that anymore. We're going to choose to delete the little triangle. Now the character is going to pop back up. Make sure you turn auto key off. So go to the timeline and just turn auto key off so we don't accidentally create any keyframes. We'll go back to frame 1. Let's just press home. And we can see with the character selected, we've still got actions on here in the NLA editor. So we've still got keyframes basically, which I need to get rid of. So click on the walk cycle channel and press X to remove it. And then click on this one here, press X to remove that one. Now we need to make sure we don't lose the walk cycle action. So go into the Outliner's Data API mode, go to the Actions section, and for the walk cycle, just make sure you've got a fake user in there so you don't lose it. And the other one we're going to be using is character move. So make sure you've got that one in there as well. Should have got a fake user. And what I want to do now is set the character's bones back to the rest pose. So we're going to pose mode. We'll set all the bones and we'll go to pose, clear transform, all. All the bones are back to the default location. And we've got no animation set up whatsoever. Well, let's just tidy the workspaces up a little bit. Alright, so we already understand the different use cases for FK and IK. And what we're going to look at now is how we can seamlessly transition between the two in one animation. So we'll start off doing the hands because we've already set these up pretty much. We've got the transform copy location constraint in place on the hand so that when we're in FK mode, it follows along with the bones of the arm that we manipulate individually. And obviously, when we turn on IK over here, then we need to turn off the copy location constraint on the hand. And that can become a little bit of, hard work. Well, not hard work, but repetitive work. And we want to try and automate as much of that as we can. So very straightforward. We'll select the hand bone. And we'll go into the bone properties. Make sure you're in pose mode for this. And go down to the custom properties at the bottom. And we'll choose to add a new one. Click on the cog. And then we'll name this to IK mode. Make this a boolean, so it's either on or off, 0 or 1. Off is 0, 1 is on. Default value, we'll have it on. And I'll just put a little description saying, turn off for FK mode. Right, so we'll copy this as a driver, right click on it and choose copy as new driver. And then we can choose whatever we've got this set to drive the other properties. And I want to drive it to change this constraint, the IK constraint, to be turned on when that is turned on over there. So right click and we'll choose paste driver. So that is now going to be turned on whenever I turn this option on here. Where is it? On this bone here. So whenever I turn this on, it will turn on the constraint for this. Now we need to do the opposite on the hand because when we've got IK mode, we want the copy location of the hand to be turned off. So in this case, we'll right click and we'll choose paste driver, but we'll need to modify it. So right click and then choose edit driver. And we need to change it from an average value, which basically means it's going to use whatever this is. So when that's on, this is going to be 1. We want it to be the inverse. So we'll need to change it to a scripted expression. And we're just going to say 1 minus IK mode. So when we turn on IK mode, 1 minus 1 is going to be 0. So it's going to turn this off. And when we turn off IK mode, 1 minus 0 is 1. So it's going to leave it turned on. That's fine. So leave that. Now you can see that's been turned off. And then in future, whenever I want IK mode, all I've got to do is click on this bone. And we can either go into the bone properties at the bottom or go into the end panel. And under the item at the bottom, we've got IK mode, which when IK is turned on, I can move the hand, but I can't move the individual bones. And when I turn IK mode off, I can't move the hand because it's copying the location of the forearm, but I can move the individual bones. And then all we need to do is keyframe this to coincide with the point when we want to switch between IK and FK, and it will automatically take care of all the constraints for the IK and for the copy location. And we'll quickly do the same for the other side as well. So click on this bone, into bone properties, down to the bottom, add a new custom property, and again we'll set it to be a boolean, so on or off. We'll change it to IK on, give it a description, a little note in there, okay. Then we'll copy this as the driver. Doesn't matter, we can copy it from either here or from here, it's the same thing. So right click, copy as new driver, and then we'll go to the constraint on this bone and paste it in. So paste driver, and then this one, copy location, paste driver again, and then edit it, change it to a scripted expression, and then 1 minus that. And there we go. Alright, so let's make a very quick animation and we'll look at how we can switch between IK to FK, and then we'll go back to IK, and we'll look at some of the problems we're going to run into and how we can resolve them. So just make sure you're on frame 1, and we'll set the left hand, or the right hand rather, turn IK mode on, and we need to keyframe this, so just press I, and that will add a keyframe for us on the IK mode. We also need to add keyframes for the hand and the pole target, because these are the two bones we're going to be manipulating in IK mode. So select this one, press I, and add a keyframe for location and rotation. Now we can move to a different frame, frame 30, and we'll move the hand in IK mode to the start position of a wave, which will then flick over to FK so we can get a better pendulum motion than IK could give us. So I'll bring this up. And then make sure you add keyframes for the hand and the pole target again. So select them both, press I, and we'll choose location and rotation. And then select the hand, and we can turn IK mode off. Now, what happens when we turn IK mode off is the hand and the arm, these two bones, flick back into their non-constraint positions, because obviously we've turned this constraint for the IK off now when we turn to FK mode. And the hand is also shot over here because it's using a copy location constraint onto this forearm bone. So we need to basically add keyframes to these bones when it's still in IK mode. But let's go back to IK mode. We'll just briefly add a keyframe, and we'll choose this bone and this bone. We'll press I, and very importantly, we need to make sure we use visual location and rotation, because visual location and rotation means it will create a keyframe after the constraints have been applied. So visual location and rotation will ensure that it stays in the position they're supposed to be in when the constraints are turned on. And now we'll turn those constraints off by going to the hand, turning IK mode off, so back in FK mode, press I. Don't worry if it flicks back to this, that's a Blender bug. Just go back one frame and then forward one frame, and it should be fine. Now we are still getting a bit of a twitch on there. So if we go back, you can see when I change from IK to FK, even though we've used visual location and rotation, for some reason, and this is, I'm pretty sure, a Blender bug, it's going to give us the incorrect result. So just turn this back on and do it again. This one, press I, visual location and rotation, and then we'll turn it back off again and press I. Let's try that. See, now it's not doing it. Don't know why that happens, but if it does, that's how you fix it. So now that we're back in FK mode, this is turned off, the IK has automatically been disabled, and the copy location has automatically been enabled by the drivers that are controlled by this property. We can now start moving the bones individually to create an FK animation. So this time, let's go to frame 45, so halfway to frame 60, and we'll just do a very simple wave gesture. We'll choose this forearm, and we'll rotate this like so, rotate the hand a bit as well. Select both, And we'll do I. I'm going to choose visual location and rotation because the hand is using a constraint. And then we'll go to frame 60. And we'll bring this one back. And we'll bring that one across. And we'll also, just to show a potential problem, select this arm and we're going to rotate it forwards like this. So we're going to select this bone, and this bone, press I, and we'll choose visual location and rotation because one of the bones, the hand bone, has got a constraint. And now what I want to do is change back to IK mode. So let's just have a look at the animation first, make sure it's all working correctly. Okay, so back to frame 60, and I want to turn IK mode back on. Now watch what happens. You see this arm has flicked all the way down here because it's looking again for its pole target. So we basically need to find a way to get this pole target lined up correctly with the FK position of the arms. And there's an absolutely incredibly simple way to do this, which is much easier than some of the methods I've seen tried before where people add additional IK switching bone networks and things like that. It's completely unnecessary because it's so easy. All you've got to do is, let's just choose a hand and we'll make sure we're on frame 60. We'll go into the item menu. So IK is turned on. Let's turn it off briefly. So this is the position it's supposed to be in. This is the position that the FK keyframes are sort of moving towards on that frame 60. All we're going to do, let's go full screen to make it a bit easier, is zoom right in, making sure you can see the pole target and the elbow. And we're just going to shift right click on the corner of this elbow to add a 3D cursor. We're going to turn IK back on and add a keyframe. And now what we're going to do is grab this pole target and just move it until the elbow is in the center of that 3D cursor. Don't have to be perfect because what we're going to do now is add a keyframe for this so that this is in the correct location. But more importantly, we need to add visual location keyframes now for the upper arm and the lower arm so that the FK transition is always working towards the endpoint being here. So click on this one, and don't forget we've got IK turned on now, so these are being controlled by constraints. So we need to add visual location and rotation. And now, when we play this back, it's an absolutely seamless transition. We've got no pop at all between those two. If, however, you do still notice you're getting a slight pop, then keep watching. We're going to cover that in the next part of the tutorial when we move on to the feet. So moving on to the foot, I've made this a little bit easier to understand by separating this out into one leg so we can see it more clearly. So this part, you don't need to follow along with me. We're going to do this again on the main robot. This is sort of an in-depth, sort of detailed breakdown of how it all works and the reasoning behind why we need to do it. But if you find it easier to digest information when following along, I have included the file as well, so you can do that if you wish. Now, with the foot, this is a little bit more complicated to set up. The reason is we can't just use a copy location on this foot, so that when we're in forward kinematics mode, so if I just turn this to FK by turning the IK off, if I rotate this now, we can't use a copy location constraint on this to make sure it follows along with this foot, because we've got a constraint on this one which relies on the position of this one, which this one modifies. So we basically get a loop and it will break Blender. Even if we turn this constraint off using the eyeball, it still will create this dependency cycle just because of a bit of a flaw with how Blender's designed. So the only way you could do it would be to actually delete the copy location here. But obviously that's not ideal because chances are we're going to want to use it again during the animation. We could do it this way. We could rotate it like this and we could still use this to, control the rotation, but that's really difficult to work with because it could end up being so far away. We'd have to mess about copying it over to the same location each time we want to rotate the foot, which would be a bit of a pain. Now you might think we can use this bone here for forward kinematics to control the shoe, but unfortunately what's going to happen is, if I just do a quick example, we'll select this one, we'll turn off the lock rotation we've got turned on in the end panel. If I rotate this now, it's fine, it works, but if I then go back to IK mode, I've got to get this foot here, the IK foot, back in line with the new rotation of this foot so that we can take over seamlessly. Now the problem is, if I rotate this now to get it back in line, it's going to add additional rotation to the foot, so we can't do that way either. So I'll just set all these back and make sure we turn the rotation lock back on for this foot as well, just so I don't accidentally move that. So the best way to do this is actually to create a second bone just for FK. So we'll call this one, we'll use this one just for IK. So let's just rename this to IK foot L. And we'll create a second duplicate of this that we'll use just for FK. So let's go into edit mode, make sure that bone's selected, and just make sure you've got normal selected for the orientation and active element for the pivot, just so that the pivot point is here on this end of the bone. Alright, so Shift D to duplicate this, and then we'll scale it, and make sure you choose to scale it on the Y. So I'm pressing the Y key, it doesn't show up unfortunately over here, and then just scale it until it's about half the size, and we'll rename this bone to FKL. What we also need to do is change the parent of this bone, because this one of course was parented to this bone, so that it rotated with it during IK when this one was affected by the rotation of this one. Now with the small one, the FK bone, we just want it to be a child of the shin. So we'll shift click on the shin and we'll press Ctrl P and then choose connected. This time we want it to actually be connected to the bone. So we'll go back into pose mode, and just before we do that, let's double check over here. Connected is ticked, yeah. So on this one, we've got it's connected. And we don't want it to inherit the rotation of the shin. We want it to maintain its own rotation so that we can, control the rotation separately. So we'll just untick inherit rotation. We go back into pose mode, and because we've made a duplicate of this bone, it's going to have the constraint on it as well. We don't want the copy location anymore because obviously we've just made this bone connected to the shin instead. So we'll delete this. So with that done, we can now actually start animating in FK mode. So just make sure we've got IK turned off, yeah. And we'll rotate this bone here. And I'll try and rotate this one. I just need to make sure I turn off the rotation lock we've got on in the end panel. So turn those off. And now we can rotate this bone freely. Now the problem is, the shoe isn't following along. And that's because the shoe is a child of the IK bone, this one here. So we need to somehow get it so that when we switch from IK to FK, the shoe will change its parent to be the FK bone instead of the IK bone. And we can't give an object more than one parent, so we're going to have to use constraints instead. So very importantly, before we add any constraints to the shoe, we need to make sure the bones are in the start position, the rest position. So select all the bones, Alt or Alt G, and then we'll come out of, we'll go into object mode, choose the shoe, and then we can start adding the constraints on. So into the constraints tab for the shoe, we're going to add two constraints. It's going to be a child of, which is a constraint version of a parent basically, but one that you can turn off. And we can choose the target to be the meta rig, and the bone we want is the IK. So this is the one we're going to have enabled when we're in IK mode, so that the shoe follows the IK bone. So IK left foot, this one, IK foot L. Your shoe's probably going to jump out of place in this scenario, or whatever you're using this for. Choose set inverse, and that'll put it back to the correct position. And also we need to add another one of these for when we're in FK mode, but obviously instead of using the IK foot, it's going to use the FK foot. So we'll just duplicate this. We'll turn the top one off, the IK one, and I'll just name this actually IK. Turn that off. And then this one I'll name FK, turn it on. Right, and we need to change the bone this time to be FK foot L. And let's give this a test. So just make sure we've got the FK turned on and the IK one is turned off. And we'll go into the bones, into pose mode. Make sure we're in FK mode, so into the constraints for the shin bone, IK is turned off. And if we try and rotate this now, we're getting a strange result, and this is because what I forgot to do to choose the shoe, we need to get rid of its parent. So into the object properties, under relations, we'll just get rid of the parent. So we can delete it here, and that will work. But if you find your shoe floats off somewhere else, what you can do instead of doing it over here is do Alt-P and then clear and keep transformation, and that will keep it in place. And then back into the bone pose mode. And if we rotate now, that will work seamlessly. And then when we want to switch to IK mode, we'll turn this back on, and then we'll choose the shoe, and we need to change whether or not which one of these it's using. So turn off FK, and we'll turn on IK this time. Back into pose mode, and then obviously we're not going to rotate these anymore because we're in IK mode, so we're going to use this, move that around, everything will follow along. One thing we do need to make sure that when we're in IK mode like this, we ideally want this FK bone to follow along with the IK bone, so that when we make the switch back to FK from IK, the bone will be in the right place. So we'll already have added a keyframe for it in the correct place. We won't have to mess about. So we'll choose this bone, and we'll just go back to, choose all the bones in fact, put them all back to the default location. And we'll choose the FK bone. We'll just add a simple copy rotation constraint. And meta rig. We want to copy the rotation of the IK foot this time. And we need to make sure this is turned on only when we're in IK mode. We need to turn it off when we're in FK mode, otherwise we won't be able to rotate it. So the final problem is, when we're in FK mode, so let's quickly go back to FK mode, turn IK off, make sure this is turned on, turned off, so we're in FK, and on the shoe, we need to go into FK mode for the constraints as well. Constraint. And don't worry, I am going to automate all this with one button in a second. So, but just for now, just to so you can see how it's working, I'm doing it manually. So back in FK mode, choose the bone, and we're going to make a movement. So we'll move it to here, and then we'll move this foot, not that one, this FK foot to here. Now, when I want to go back to IK mode from FK mode, I've got to somehow get this foot to come back over here so that it lines up perfectly with the foot we've got over here, the new location. I could try and do it by hand. You know, I could try and get it all lined up properly based on maybe this one here, but that's going to be a bit of a pain. So let's just put everything back to how it should be. Back to the default location. What we can do instead is add another bone, one that can be used to snap this IK foot to when we're coming out of FK mode. So we need a copy of this foot bone basically. So we're going to edit mode, Shift D, we'll copy it, we'll scale it down a bit on the y-axis, it's a bit smaller. Now we're going to pose mode, and we'll go to the bone properties, and under viewport display we've got the custom shape. We'll just make this foot a bit smaller, so we'll select all three of these, type 0.5. So that's given us this little tiny foot in the middle that we can use to snap the big foot onto. They've both got exactly the same pivot points and things. So I'm going to parent this one so that it moves with the FK foot. I'm going to parent it to the FK foot. So we'll go into edit mode, and I'm going to shift click on the, that's going to be quite difficult. What we can do is Alt shift click, and then we can choose which one we want. We want the FK. I'm going to do Control P, and I don't want it connected, I want to keep the offset. And now, when we go into pose mode, if I rotate this, you'll see the little foot's going to follow along. So let's just show you how that works. We make a very quick movement, so move that there, and we'll move the FK foot like that. All we do now is go into the Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and just make sure you've got the global copy global transform add-on enabled. And when you've got that enabled, it will show up in the animation tab over here, and then you can choose the bone you want to copy the transform coordinates of. So I'm going to choose the snapper bone. I'll just rename this actually as well. Let's name this to IK foot snapper. And we'll choose copy, and then we'll choose the bone we want to put into the same location and rotation, and choose paste. And there we are. So now we've got everything lined up, we can then continue on doing IK animation from this point. And the last thing to do is to set up automation so that when we change between IK and FK, all of these various constraints that we've got will automatically become enabled or disabled depending on which mode we're in. We'll choose the foot bone, the foot controller for the IK, go into the bone properties, down to the bottom, and we'll add a new custom property. Now you've got to make sure you do this in pose mode, so make sure you're in pose mode. So a new property, and it needs to be a boolean, so on or off, and we'll name it IK mode. Default value is going to be on, and description is going to say turn off for FK. I'll choose OK, and then we'll right click on this property and we'll choose copy as new driver, and then we can find all the constraints that we need to control. So firstly, you've got the IK constraint on the shin. Go into the constraints tab and we'll right click on the eyeball and choose paste driver. So that will be turned on whenever this property here is enabled down at the bottom. And this, of course, again, is available in the item menu as well. So you've got it in there. You don't need to keep coming into this panel. So the next constraint we need to enable is the rotation on this FK bone. So go into constraints, got the copy rotation, so that when we're in IK mode, if I paste this driver, this will be turned on so that this bone follows along with the IK foot. And we've also got the shoe. So if we go into object mode, we'll set the shoe into the shoes constraints this time. IK mode, when IK is turned on, we want this to be turned on. So right click, paste driver. And when IK mode is turned off, we want this one to be on. And when it's turned on, we want this one to be off. So right click, we'll choose paste driver. And this one we need to modify because otherwise this is going to be turned on when IK mode is turned on. So right click, edit driver, change it to a scripted expression, and then we'll just invert it by doing 1 minus IK mode. There we go. So now that's inverted. And then just to be sure there's no problems with this, we'll make a very quick animation where we switch from IK to FK and then back to IK, just like we did with the hand. And it'll also give you an opportunity to see how this works in action. Alright, so it's going to be very similar to the arm rotation, but we are going to run into a few problems. So select all the bones, if you're following along, and then Alt-R, Alt-G, put everything back to where it should be, or the rest position rather, and we'll just do visual location rotation. So we've got a keyframe for everything in the scene there, all of these bones. Then we'll select the IK foot, and make sure we had a keyframe for IK mode, so press I. Then we'll go to frame 30, and we'll just make a very simple movement with this foot in IK mode. Something like that. And then we'll do I. In fact, we'll set all the bones. We'll do I, visual location rotation, because there are bones there that are going to be affected by constraints, by the IK constraints. And this time we're going to turn IK mode off. Then press I, go back a frame, forward a frame. We're getting a bit of a pop there, like before. So we turn IK mode back on. Shift click these two, I, visual location rotation. Then we'll turn IK back off, keyframe it again, and now it's going to work. Okay. So on to frame 60, and we can start moving things around in FK mode. So let's move this one like this. Select the little FK foot, move that like that. Make it down like this. And this one, I'm going to rotate. I'm actually going to rotate it on the y-axis to show you the problem we're going to face. I'm going to bring that around like that. And we'll select all the bones we've got, and we'll just do I. And we'll do visual location rotation. We're going to need to move this foot into snap into place with this one. So we're going to do animation, copy the little foot position, and then we'll paste it onto this one, and then we're just going to keyframe that location rotation. Now then, this is where we're going to hit the problem. When I turn IK mode back on, just look at the position here. If I put a 3D cursor in this corner, I turn IK mode back on, you'll see this bone twist round. Now, we're not going to be able to match this position in IK mode. So let me just show you. There's no way I can move this where this bone is going to end up twisted in the same way that it was when we were in FK mode. And the reason for that is, if we come down to if you select this bone here and go into its properties, under inverse kinematics, we've actually locked the X and the Y position because obviously we don't want it to break that hinge. It can only move or can only rotate on the Z axis without breaking that mesh hinge that we made, if you remember. And because we've rotated this now in FK mode on the Y axis, it's going to be impossible for the IK mode to match it. So in order to avoid this, the only way you can do it is make sure that you also lock the bone itself so that you can't make rotations in a way that IK can't match when you switch back. So let's just go back to let's just select this bone here. I'm going to delete its rotation or its keyframes. That's going to put it back, and then I'll just do I visual location and rotation. Set this foot, and now it should be able to match it. So if we just put the 3D cursor here, we'll turn IK mode back on, and then keyframe that. We can now move this, and it should allow us to get it exactly correct. There we go. And then we'll just keyframe the pole target, and then you'll see we've got a seamless transition with no jump at all. And just for absolute perfection, once you've got IK mode turned back on, you can just set these two, I, and choose visual location rotation, and that will make sure that the FK bone is always moving towards the IK's position. And then it'll be absolutely seamless then. And there we are. So they're the problems you can run into. And obviously don't forget as well, before you start using FK next time, that you do lock the bones that are necessary to be locked. So for example, in this one, X and Y. And that'll just make sure we can't run into that same problem again, because if I try and rotate that on the Y, nothing's going to happen. Alright, so moving on to the main file now, we'll recreate the same setup on both of the feet. So into pose mode, and make sure that all the bones are unhidden. So go into the data properties for the armature and just turn on the two layers that have got the hidden bones on, using the bone collections in Blender 4. And you need to make sure as well that the character is in rest mode. So just Alt-R, Alt-G, just to be safe. And then we'll start off in edit mode with the 2 feet. So Shift, go into edit mode, tab into edit mode rather. We're going to duplicate these 2 bones. And in fact, actually, before we duplicate them, let's select them and rename them. So F2, we can't call these IK foot R and IK foot L because that name is already in use by this bone here on both feet. You can see at the top. So we'll rename these to IK shoe snapper, IK shoe parent. And we'll do the same for this one. F2. We'll do IK shoe parent dot L. Let's just check I've made this one .R. Yeah. And just be absolutely certain that both names match, so that if you remember, when we go into pose mode, we've got the ability to paste the X flipped pose. So just make sure they should match exactly, apart from the R and the L at the end, which they do. So now we've renamed those two. We'll do Shift D. We'll make sure we've got orientation set to normal again. And this time, because we've got 2 bones selected, we'll change the pivot point to individual origins, and then SY, scale those down a bit. And we'll just rename these. So instead of IK, it's going to be FK. FK shoe parent .R. We'll get rid of the bit at the end. And then for this one, F2, FK shoe parent .L. And we also need to make sure under the bone properties, under relations, we change this to be the shin. So shin L in this case needs to be connected, and we need to turn off inherit rotation. And for this one is shin R, connected, and turn off inherit rotation. So that's the additional bone setup that the shoe will follow along with. So what we'll do now is set the shoes, both of them, Alt-P, clear and keep transformation. And then to get these to follow along, what we'll do instead is parent them using the constraints like we did before, depending on whether we're in IK mode or FK mode, which one it's parented to. So set this shoe, and go into the constraints, and we'll add a child of, meta rig, and this one can be for IK, so I'll call it IK shoe parent R, set inverse, and then we'll duplicate it. Just turn them both off for now. I'll rename this one to IK. Rename this one to FK. So just change the bone on this one to be the FK shoe parent R. And then for this shoe, we'll click this one, shift click this one, Control L, and can we copy the constraints? No. So go into Object menu, Constraints, copy constraints to selected. And now we've got those two constraints on this shoe as well. We just need to change this to be L at the end. And on this one as well. So I'll set the armature again, back into pose mode, and then we need to add the custom property on both of these feet. So we're going to the bone tab, making sure we're in pose mode, down to the bottom, add a new custom property, make sure it's a Boolean, we'll call it IK mode, default's on, and then we'll say description turned off for FK. Click OK. Now I'll do the same for this one. Boolean, IK mode, turn off for FK. So we've got those set up in pose mode. What we need to do is use this properties value to drive the constraints as before. So right click, we'll choose copy as new driver. Then we'll choose this one first, go into the constraints tab for the IK. So when we turn IK mode on here, we want this obviously to be turned on as well. So paste driver. For the rotation on this one, we've not set up yet. So just going to click on this to get rid of copy location. And then we'll add a copy rotation. Meta rig. And this time we want to copy it to the IK shoe parent R, so that when it's in IK mode, the FK little bone there will copy the rotation. And then we can right click, paste driver. Now we'll do the same on this side. So we get rid of that copy location that we don't need anymore. Copy rotation, meta rig, shoe parent L for the IK. Right click and then paste driver. And then we've got the shoe. So come out of go into object mode on the bone, and we'll choose the shoe. And for the constraints we've got here, IK mode, right click, paste driver. And then for the FK mode, we're going to right click, paste driver, and then edit the driver, and then change it to a scripted expression, and invert it by doing 1 minus IK mode. And then we'll do the same for this one. Right click. In fact, actually, very careful, we've made a mistake. I nearly made a mistake there. I nearly copied the driver from this one, from this shoe bone, onto this one over here. So we definitely don't want to do that. And let's just check. I've done the same over there as well. So I've actually made a bit of an error there. We need to copy this one to drive this one, obviously, and this one as well. So these ones are done. And then for this shoe, we need to use the IK from this one. So go into pose mode, choose this foot, right click, copy as new driver, then choose this bone, go into constraints, right click, paste driver. And this one, right click, paste driver. Don't forget I put the wrong one in there by accident, so just we'll overwrite that, paste driver. Now it's using the correct one from this foot instead of from that foot. And then we're going to object mode, choose this shoe, into the constraints we've set up, do right click, paste driver, and then right click, set inverse first, and then right click on this one, paste driver, and do set inverse again. And this one, we'll edit it, change it to a scripted expression, and then 1 minus, so that when IK is on, this is off, and when IK is off, this is on. And let me just check everything, make sure everything's working. Go in here, IK mode is on. Let's just move this around. So that's working. Now let's look at what happens if we try FK. So turn this to FK mode. If I rotate this here, we've got a problem. So the problem is, obviously, this object here, so this one, was previously parented to a bone, which is not even there anymore. So IK shoe parent R was parented to IK shoe parent R, and obviously in FK mode, that is not going to be moving. So we need to just basically get rid of that. I'm going to make it the, let's just undo that, Alt-P, clear and keep transform. And we want to parent it to the shoe this time. So shift click on this one, Control-P, and then parent it to the object. Now when I move that shoe, that should move along. If we go back into pose mode and move this, a little one, then that will work. And if we go back into IK mode, it will still work. We'll do the same on this side. So come out into object mode, choose this bottom piece here, and we're going to change its parent to be this shoe here. So I'll just do Alt-P, and then I'll shift click on this one, Control-P, and parent it to the object. Let's try this side. Make sure it's all working. Now we're going to FK mode on this one. And it's all still working. And then finally, we just need to add the shoe snapper so that when we go from FK to IK, we can snap the IK bone back to the FK foot position. So let's just quickly do that. Into edit mode, I'm going to select both of these bottom feet, Shift D, SY, scale those in a bit, and let's rename those. So this one can be IK foot snapper.R, and then this one, F2, IK foot snapper.L. And then pose mode, under the bone settings, under viewport display, custom shape, and we'll change that to be smaller, 0.5. And then this one, just select until you see it says IK foot snapper, or you can Alt click to select like that, IK foot snapper. And this time we'll change it to 0.5 again, so 0.5. Now we've got those in place. We need to parent those to the FK bone. So go into edit mode, Alt shift click so we can choose the FK one, Control P, and keep offset, and then we'll do the same on this side as well. So this one, Alt shift click, and then choose the FK one, Control P, and then keep offset. Then back into pose mode and make sure we're in FK mode. Then when we rotate the FK bone, the little foot snapper will follow along. And make sure all your bones are in rest pose. And then one final thing, make sure we lock these axes so we can't accidentally move them in a rotation that IK mode won't be able to match when we switch from FK to IK because of IK having those axes locked. And we'll do the same for this one as well. And as well as making sure that IK can always match the FK position of the bones, it will also make sure that we don't break that underlying mesh hinge that we've got in the middle there. So let's just unlock them again. And I'll try and rotate that. You see it's going to break the model underneath. That'll break the hinge. So just make sure you do lock those. And then you can't accidentally break anything. And one potential problem that you might run into is that when you turn IK on, so on this foot here, for example, if you watch this leg, so turn IK on, you'll see the leg is going to be flicking around when the rest pose, which is this one when IK is off, tries to align the bones with the pole target. So if I turn this on, if I want to avoid this, I'll just turn this on briefly. I'll select both of these leg bones. I'll go to pose, apply, and then I'll say apply the selected bones as rest pose. And now, when I go back to the foot and I turn IK off and on, we're not going to be getting that flick anymore because the IK position has now been set as the rest position. So if I just do that to both legs, make sure I turn IK on for this one, and then do the same for this one. Pose, apply, selected as rest pose. Alright, so let's put this new rig to use and we'll give a good demonstration of when it's really useful, or imperative in fact, to be able to switch to IK to make your animating much easier. So we're going to start off, we'll go into the NLA editor. Just tick this box here if it's not already ticked, and tick this one as well so we're only seeing the selected object. We'll come into object mode, and I want the character to start walking along using the actions that we created earlier. So I'm going to click on no action. I'm going to say we'll use the walk cycle that we created. Let's just have a quick check on what's happening. So we've got a few issues. For the foot here, so going to pose mode, we need to turn IK on. And then for these hands, we need to turn IK off. That's just because we previously animated it in FK mode. Now if we play this back, everything should be working as it was before. So we'll push this down, and I want to change the speed of it using the property on the armature that we created earlier for the walk speed. So right click on the walk speed, choose copy as new driver, and then on this clip that we've just pushed down, go to the action clip, and then we'll right click here and choose paste driver. And then we'll choose to repeat it so that it covers the entire timeline. And while I'm at it, I'm going to increase the length of the animation to 250. We'll zoom out so we can see it all. And we'll just repeat it now until it reaches the end of the timeline. Play that back, then we've got the walk cycle working. The next thing we want to do is add the movement. So we've also got an action for that. So click on the live action and then choose the character move. And then we can extend this, because if you recall, just go into the graph editor. This actually goes on forever. So we can extend this as far as we want and it will keep having an influence on the resulting animation. And that's because we use channel extrapolation mode linear to get these two keyframes to then build a linear line that goes on endlessly. So we'll come back out. In fact, we'll push this down and then we'll change the length so that it goes all the way past 250. And that will give us an endless walk. What we also need to do is control the speed of this with that same driver. So come down into playback speed, right click and choose paste driver. And if you recall, there are actually different timings on those. This one was half the speed we needed. So we go into here, right click, and we'll choose edit driver. And this time we're going to change it to a scripted expression. And because we want it to be half the speed, we need the scale to be twice the value. So we're going to do walk speed times 2. And if we play this back, it's going to perfectly fit to get this at the same time in between the movement and the walk cycle. So take this back over here. Okay, so let's add something for the robot to push along. And we'll go into full screen for this. We'll do Shift A. We'll add a cube, I think. We'll go with a cube. We'll move it forward on the y-axis a little bit. We'll move it up so it's on the floor. So GZ, move it up by 1 meter because it's a 2 meter box. And then I want to find a place for the robot to start interacting with the cube. So let's press play. I think I'll do it around about here. We'll have a few steps, and I want to get it set in a place where the hands are by the side, so that when the robot's arms, can come up simultaneously to begin pushing the box. I'm going to go to the dope editor. We'll choose the robot, We'll go into pose mode and we'll choose the hand. And we need to use visual constraints. What we're going to be doing basically is recording the result of the two strips that are below it on the NLA track. And because these hands are using the copy location constraint in FK mode, we need to use visual. So do I, visual location and rotation, and we'll turn on IK mode and press I to record a keyframe for that as well. And we'll choose the other hand, we'll do I, visual location rotation, and we'll turn on IK for this one as well and press I to record that. Now you'll notice that the hands sort of have flipped up and they're only in the correct place on the frame of the keyframe. What I want to do, I want these keyframes to influence the position continuously afterwards. So when I go forwards, I don't want them to go jumping back up over there. So what we'll need to do is choose the meta rig action, so the live action in the NLA editor, and we'll change the extrapolation to hold forward. So that basically means that these keyframes will have an effect constantly afterwards. So no matter how far we go, the hands are going to be controlled by the previous keyframes. If we go before this though, we're going to run into a problem. The hands have now jumped up, even though IK doesn't turn on until this frame. Even if we turn it off over here, so you see that's pushed it back down, as soon as I move the timeline, it's going to just jump straight back up, even though we've not yet got a keyframe on this. Now I don't really want to keyframe it off earlier on in the animation, otherwise it might interfere with other NLA tracks once we've pushed it down. We don't want that. So what we're going to do instead is come to the bone property, and we'll go down to this IK on custom property we made, into the settings, and we just need to say turn off default value and click OK. And basically what that means is it's going to use its IK is going to be turned off by default until it encounters the first keyframe. If I move this now, you'll see by default it's off, and then when it gets to the first keyframe, it gets turned on. So that's working for that one. We'll do the same for this one. So that's fixed both of those problems. Right. So let's bring the box across now. So I want to get the box to come across to be close enough for the robot to start leaning forwards and grabbing it at this point. So let's move this back into object mode. We'll move the box across. We don't want it to be too close, otherwise the robot's knees are going to start coming through the box. So maybe a little bit closer than that, maybe about here. So we've got a nice bit of a distance in between because I want this box to not sort of move smoothly. I'm going to animate it so that its speed fluctuates as if it's getting caught on the ground as it's being pushed along. And that's going to make it more difficult to get the hands to stick onto the box, obviously. So we'll add a keyframe, press I, and we'll do just location. I'm not going to be keyframing scale or rotation. And then I'm going to go to the last frame, so shift right arrow. I want to move the box across now so that it's about the same distance away. So maybe about here. We'll do I, location. Let's just play this back. So we get to this point. It's going to move away slowly, too slowly. The robot's getting too close to it. But now it's got to speed up to make up for that slow movement at the beginning and end. So in the middle, it's getting too far away. So let's go to the graph editor over here. And all I need to do is make sure it speeds up faster basically at the beginning and slows down faster at the end. So we'll get this handle for the Y location. We can turn the other two off if we want. We're just going to bring this across now to the left so it starts moving much faster. And we'll do the same for this one, GX, bring it across. We'll play this back now. And we can see the speed is staying pretty much the same all the way across. So let's add a little bit of movement to this box. And I'm going to do that using the method we used previously. So with the Y location channel selected, we'll go to modifiers and we'll add a noise modifier. And I only want the noise to come in after the robot starts pushing it. We don't want it to be sort of moving around before the robot gets there. So on frame 50, we'll say restrict frame range, so it only happens at frame 50 and it finishes at frame 250. And we don't want it to be immediate, we'll give it a little bit of a blend in just so it's smooth initially. Let's try this. So it's way too fast. Let's just turn the scale up. Try that. And it's going too far either way. So let's just turn the strength down to something like 0.2. Try that. And if we want to make it a little bit faster, maybe turn the scale down to something like 4.5. Let's try that. There we are. So it's nice jerky movement, which would mean it would be very difficult in FK mode because we'd have to keyframe the arms and the hands every single frame to try and get it to stick to the movement of the box. And this is where IK is going to come in really useful, because it's basically, we're going to get the hand to stick to the box, and then the IK hand will control the movement of the bones for the arms automatically forward. So there's no keyframing for us to do at all. So let's go back to this frame, and we'll go forward a few frames. In fact, this frame, actually, I don't want the box to start moving on this frame. It needs to start moving a little bit later to give the robot time for the hands to come up. So to GX, we'll probably give our hands, say, 10 frames to come up. So we'll move this forward to frame 60. So I'll go GX, 10. Just type 10, it's going to move it forward. And then the robot gets to here, and then the box starts moving. So frame 60, where the box starts moving, I want the hands to be on the box. So let's grab this hand first into pose mode. I'll just move it up. I'll rotate it around. I'll go into top view and rotate it this way. Let's go full screen for this. And the robot can't reach at the moment, but I'm not too worried about that just yet. I'll do the same for this one. Before we go into side view, make it a bit easier to make sure they're flat. That up. Up. I want to bring them both back a bit so the arms are a little bit bent. Right. That's fine. And I want to make sure I keyframe both of these, so I'll select them. I'll press I, and we'll do, this time, because we're in IK mode, these hands aren't using a constraint. So if we go into constraints mode for the hands, you'll see the copy location is turned off. So for these ones, we can actually just use I, we can use just a normal location and rotation. So now we've got those keyframes in there. And I want the fingers to be uncurled as well. So let's just go back to this one. And we need to make sure that we keyframe the fingers at this point so that we can start uncurling them at this point as well. So we're going to the bone tab, in bone groups rather, in the armature selection, or if you're in Blender 4, the bone collections. We'll select all of the finger bones, select, 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 select. So we've got all the fingers and thumbs of both hands, and we'll add a keyframe. So we'll press I, and we'll do, just rotation is fine for the fingers. And then we'll go forward to frame 60, and we're going to uncurl them. So at this point, in fact, we'll go back a few frames so that they're uncurled just before they get to the box. And we can't do both hands at once because the local transforms of the left and the right are different. So we'll need to do one hand at a time. I'll deselect these ones. Now RZ, we'll get these hands straightened out. About there. And then we'll do it for the left hand. So deselect them all. Select this one. Select this one. And then RZ, we'll uncurl those. I think the thumb has come a little bit too far. So just select those, RZ, bring those back into it. And we'll make sure we select all of them there. Select, 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 select. We've got all the fingers and thumbs selected. We'll add another keyframe, I, just for rotation. And now, when we come back, we're going to be in a fist at this point. Let's just turn off overlays a second. So they're in a fist at this point. and then they're going to uncurl so they're flat just before we get to the box. Now the box is a little bit far away at the moment, and what I'm going to do to get the robot to reach this is push this down now into its own track. So we've got this animation that we needed. Just going to push this down. And we can add another action now to the waist so that the robot can lean forward and actually reach the box. The reason I've done it in two different tracks is because I want this one to be replaced because the hands need to have no influence from the below tracks, but I want the waist to continue having that up and down bounce that is created by the walk cycle. So we needed to put it on to a different track so that we can set it to combine in here instead of replace. So let's choose this bone here, and we'll go back to, I think, frame 50. So we'll go back to frame 50. So the hands start coming up. I think we'll start leaning forward a little bit after, perhaps. So frame 54. And then with the waist still selected, we'll record a keyframe. And we'll do I, location rotation. And then we'll go forward to the point where the hands are flat on the box, which is frame 60. And we'll rotate this waist forward now. Bring this head up. And then we'll keyframe both of these. I, location rotation. So to fix the hands, we'll go back into this one, press tab to modify the keyframes of that action. And then I'll just position these nice and flat with the box. And then we'll do I, location rotation. So basically I've just overwritten the previous keyframes that are on that same frame. Bit of a snap on the head because I forgot to keyframe the original position. Never mind, I'll fix that in a second. But the hands are moving really nicely. We'll come back out of tab mode. So we're no longer tweaking this particular strip. We're back on the live action. And what I want to do is add a constraint to these hands on this frame. So let's go into the constraints option. We'll choose this hand first, the left hand, and we'll add a new constraint. It's going to be the child of. So this is like a constraint version of a parent, as we've already seen. And I'm going to press E and select the box. Now, if you don't, when you select E and hover over the box, if it doesn't let you choose it, it's because you've got show bone X-ray turned on. When this is on, press E, hover, you don't get anything. You can't, if you click it, you won't get anything in there. So just make sure you turn off show bone X-ray, press E, and then choose the box, and then make sure you choose set inverse. And of course, you've got to make sure as well that you're on frame 60, the point where the hand actually makes contact with the box. And then we'll do the same for this one. Child of, E, choose the box, and then set inverse, just to make sure it's in the right place on that frame. And we need to make sure we add a keyframe, so choose I on frame 60. Do the same for this one, I. And before this, obviously, we need to make sure that the hands are not a child of the box. So we'll go to frame 59, and we'll turn it off and press I. And then we'll do the same for this hand as well. Turn it off and press I. And now, if we play this back, so the elbows could do with coming down a little bit. So we'll come back to the point on the timeline where we want the elbows to be in the original position, and then keyframe both of the pole targets for the elbows. I, location rotation. And then to get the correct position of the head, I'll just go one frame before this action, and then we can actually just keyframe it based on the position that's been created by the tracks below, and then it'll have a new start position, and I can move that now across to the first frame of this particular action. So we'll move it to the right by 1. There we go. Oh, I need to deselect the others first. Just select this one and then move that onto the beginning of the this action, and now it's going to be in the right place when it starts and comes back. Let's try this. And then I think on this frame, where we make contact, we're going to bring these two pole targets for the elbows down and record that. Let's try that then. Well, a slight problem, the box seems to be getting a little bit too far away from the robot, so the hands can't reach. So that's easily fixed. We'll go back into the box, so go into object mode, choose the box, and go into the graph editor, choose the Y location. And what we could try and do is just slow it down a little bit in the middle. So move the box back a little bit in the middle where it starts getting too far away. So to do that, so let's put a keyframe on here. We'll press I. We've got the Y location channel selected. We'll press I and we'll say only selected channels. It's going to put us a keyframe in there, and then we can just grab this and move that box a little bit further back until it's back on the object, until it's back on the hands. And we'll go through, make sure it stays on the hands all the way. So in this case, we've actually still got the problem. And I realise now that the problem is we started moving the box a little bit later, so it needs to be slowed down a bit. It can't travel as far. So all we need to do on the last frame is just move it a little bit further to the left so it's closer to the robot, and that should fix it all the way through the animation. I think it's good to leave these little errors in the video because it gives a demonstration of things that you might run into. Let's try this. And I think now we can probably get rid of that keyframe in the middle. Yeah. And then to make sure those hips get a little bit of the bounce from the walk cycle below, we'll choose this and we'll go into the NLA editor. And we need to make sure for the live action, we change this from replace to combine. And now the hips should continue wobbling when she leans forward. There we go. And there we go. So there's a demonstration of why it's important to be able to switch between FK and IK to save yourself a lot of work where it would otherwise be very difficult or in some circumstances impossible to keyframe in FK.